After Keiji Inafune left Capcom, it seemed like Mega Man was dead, but soon after, he started the spiritual successor on Kickstarter known as Mighty No. 9. It got a ton of support, but unfortunately has been marred with a lot of delays before the game has finally now hit store shelves. However, even with all the delays and everything that's been said, is this game truly worthy of the legacy that's been set up before it, or is this just another Kickstarter that's gone bad? Mighty No. 9 is very similar to the later entries in the Mega Man series, much more keen to the Mega Man X series than the original classic Mega Man series, though there are definitely some influences from Mega Man 8. In Mighty No. 9, you're controlling the robot known as Mighty No. 9, aka Beck, who is one of the creations of Dr. White. There are, of course, several other creations of Dr. Whites that you'll meet along your journey, Mighty No. 1 through Mighty No. 8, who work as this game's version of the Robot Masters or the Maverick Hunters. Once you jump into a level though, the influence of Mega Man is very apparent, not just from the robot designs and character designs, but also just from the overall level designs, the music, and everything else that goes along with Mighty No. 9 is obviously extremely influenced from those classic games. But there are some big differences when it comes to the core gameplay. Yes, you're going to be running, you're going to be jumping, you're going to be firing at enemies. There is no charge ability or the ability to slide, but you do get the ability to dash, and by dashing, you're actually able to absorb your enemies. Instead of just taking out an enemy like normal by firing at it until it's destroyed, you can actually stun it. It'll flash a different color, and then you can actually absorb it by charging into it. In fact, hitting several enemies in a row, you can get a bonus for comboing and dashing into several enemies in a row and absorbing them all at once. The whole dashing and absorption is the biggest departure for Mighty No. 9 from the games that it was inspired by. Though quickly, once I made a few levels in, I got used to the dashing mechanics, and overall I actually enjoyed the new absorption feature. You're not limited when it comes to your dash ability. In fact, once you dash, if you're dashing in midair, you can continue to dash in order to get over larger and bigger gaps, and even be able to backdash so you can quickly return to a platform if you've accidentally overshot your jump. Once you absorb a robot, you'll gain a little bit of ability, and once you get enough of it, you'll actually earn a bonus ability for a period of time. If a robot is red, you'll get a fire ability, or if they're green, you'll get the speed up or wind ability. If you end up capturing and absorbing ones that are blue, it'll fill up this game's equivalent of the E-tanks. You actually have two at your disposal from the very start. You don't have to search levels or find them, or end up finding individual ones that you can use and end up being gone once they're used. You can keep refilling the same E-tanks, but unfortunately, once you end up dying, you end up losing all of the meter that you end up filling. This can be quite disheartening, especially once you get farther in the levels if you had two of these extra health things set up and you end up dying near the end. While many of the levels in the game are relatively straightforward and linear, where you're going to be traveling from point A to point B, starting a level and then getting to the boss chamber, there are a few times where the overall gameplay does change up for these levels, such as the highway level, where you're going to be jumping from car to car and watching out for street signs on a very large highway setting, and touching the road is an instant death. Speaking of instant death though, if you're not a fan of games that have instant death of any kind, and I'm not just talking about pits, but also spikes and electrical fields, then you're not going to enjoy too much time with Mighty No. 9, as there are quite a few segments that have these instant death areas. Sometimes, just due to the setup of the levels, it can be a crapshoot when jumping down into lower areas and the camera hasn't scrolled quite enough so you can tell if it's actually safe or not, so you'll have to take those leaps of faith, which can get a little bit annoying, but overall they didn't overwhelm me at any point. Some other highlights for the level design include the oil refinery, where there's going to be a lot of oil scattered, and when enemies use fire abilities, similar to Flame Man from Mega Man 6, that oil will ignite and you'll have to watch out for the large amounts of fire. You'll have a large skyscraper construction site that you'll have to climb and actually grab on the rings that will actually raise or lower you or go left to right, and time your jumps correctly with the air burst so that you'll be able to continue moving forward. There's also a presidential style stage stage where you're battling a sniper. You're basically in just a hallway, but you'll have to keep going through the hallway repeatedly until you're able to locate the sniper and do some damage to him, and he'll teleport to another area and you'll have to find him again, and you have to keep doing this all within one life. If you die at any point during the stage, you have to start back from the beginning, which was a little bit tedious, but I definitely applaud the overall design and change of pace from the other levels that I have been completing. When it comes time for the boss battles themselves, overall I like the designs of the bosses. Each of the bosses and characters in the game do have a voice, and they do have various cutscenes and dialogue sequences throughout the course of the level and before the boss fights, and allowing you to get a little bit more of the character before you end up doing battle with them at the end of those stages. A lot of the characters will also make reappearances throughout the course of other levels. The bosses themselves are relatively standard fare with figuring out patterns and figuring out the best ways in order to attack them. Every robot ends up having a weakness. Defeating a robot will end up giving you the new ability from them, and then you can use that against the other robots and use those in the various different levels as well. In a boss fight though, you can't just wail on a particular boss. What you have to do is lower their health to a certain point, they'll start changing color, and then you'll be able to absorb them by running and doing the dash into them. You'll then continue that process until all their health is gone, and usually once they get about halfway, they'll end up changing up their pattern and add more devastating moves. The problem is though, once you end up getting them lowered enough that they actually do change color, you have to be quick to absorb them, and if you're not, unfortunately they will recover and bring back that amount of health that you had just taken down during that segment from the previous time that you ended up absorbing them. Well, of course, I love the ability to gain the boss's powers once you end up defeating them. The way that you end up changing your abilities and actually turn into those various forms is something that I wasn't the biggest fan of. Instead of just standard selecting the ability from a menu, you actually can't pause and change abilities. You'll have to use the trigger buttons in order to actually select what ability you want, and then press triangle to turn back into that form. And then you can press triangle again to turn back into regular back, as well as if you want to go from one ability to another. Thankfully you can. You have to go into one ability, select the next one, and then press triangle again. But just the whole process of pressing triangle when you're so used to in classic games like this to be able to instantly switch definitely took some time to get used to, and there was a few occasions where I ended up getting hit because I wasn't able to quite change exactly when I wanted to, or I ended up selecting the wrong ability. Besides Beck, you can also play as Call for one stage. Now, she does play a little bit differently. She can only fire one shot out at a time. She uses a jetpack to hover. She has a shield to block enemy fire since she's unable to use any of the boss abilities that Beck has gained, as well as she is unable to absorb the enemies by using her dash. Her level is overall just okay, and it's a bit jarring since you're so used to playing as Beck and the action-packed levels leading up to this. It's overall just okay, and it would have been fine for its own separate mode, and actually you get to use Call for certain challenges in challenge mode, but this level in particular just ended up falling flat to me. Speaking of stages though, there's an opening level, 8 of the robot boss mighty number stages for you to tackle, as well as a few end levels after you complete those before facing off with the final boss of the game. Playing through the game for the very first time on the normal difficulty with only 2 lives at my disposal going into levels, it took me 4.5 to 5 hours in order to complete it. This includes failing quite a few times at the actual final boss of the game, mostly due to having to do a lot of button mashing, more so than the actual overall difficulty of the final boss. Though veterans of Mega Man like myself will probably breeze through large portions of the game, especially on your second time through. Though that initial time is all about figuring out the patterns for the bosses and being able to dash your way through some of the more hard obstacles during the main actual levels. Besides the main game, there's also the challenge mode. Here, Beck or Call, or actually both together as there is a co-op online ability for the challenge mode, you tackle various challenges. They involve defeating certain enemies or running through certain areas without actually being able to fire and attack enemies, and just various other things to put a little bit of extra challenge and spin on the overall gameplay. Besides that, there's also the online mode where you can battle off against somebody else in a score attack like thing where you'll be trying to get the higher score during a small segment of a particular stage. There'll be key target enemies that'll be worth more, and you get more points depending upon how many monsters that you're able to actually absorb during that time period. And you also have boss battles at the end of those particular modes, and you'll be competing against the opponent in order to see who can get those key absorptions on the boss while you're doing battle with them and trying to stay alive. From a technological standpoint, the game never crashed on me, though I have heard plenty of horror stories, not only from the game on other platforms, but also even the PS4 version having some crashing issues, though I never actually ran into them. There is, however, some really bad slowdown and frame rate drops during certain parts. If you fire too many of certain moves, it ended up slowing down. When certain text would pop up on the screen, there would definitely be some slowdown. And it seemed like button presses sometimes just weren't being registered from the amount that I was hitting due to just how much chaos was currently going on screen. I wouldn't say that it caused too many deaths or too many unnecessary hits, but it definitely was unacceptable for a game that has been in development for as long as it has. I feel like they definitely should have been able to fix some of these issues. And while I've heard that a lot of people aren't really big fans of the graphics, for me, I thought they were perfectly fine. I like the art style that was given to the main characters. It was definitely a cartoony, old anime style. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Astro Boy with some of the character designs, and more of that kind of cheap animation that I've seen in some Japanese animes. While some will definitely be turned off by it and we're expecting a bit more, overall I didn't mind that. However, the thing I did mind though was the cutscenes and any of the dialogue that's spoken throughout the game. Not only is the voice acting very slow and just overall bad, which I think is intentional, but overall though just kind of took me out of any potential story that was being told throughout the game, as well as there is absolutely no mouth movement or sometimes no animation from the characters that are delivering dialogue, which I just find inexcusable. You want to try to like these characters and get involved with the story, but they're showing absolutely no effort, no emotion, as if this was an old PS2 game. In the end, Mighty No. 9 is not a bad game by any means. Yes, it was delayed and had a development cycle that took way too long, especially considering it was a Kickstarter game that people have been desperately waiting to get their hands on. Overall, from being an outsider to that and not funding the Kickstarter and not really being overly hyped for it, the game was pretty fun. It definitely reminded me, of course, of the games that it's based off of. And no, maybe it isn't as classic as those, but you can see the influence as well as some innovations and changes to that overall formula to make Mighty No. 9 a little bit different than those games. I have seen a lot of hate thrown towards Mighty No. 9, not only before its release, but now after its release has finally happened. I do get that a lot of people are disappointed and desperately were waiting for the rewards or get the game in their hands that ended up funding it on Kickstarter. However, if you can get past that overblown hype from all the delays and just the overall appeal of this game, it's not a bad playing game by any means, and it definitely has some charm to it. Mighty No. 9 is available for $19.99 on all the current gen platforms, as well as even some of the last gen platforms. It's also available in stores for $29.99 for the physical release that comes with the DLC, as well as a few extra goodies as well. In the end, I'm giving Mighty No. 9 a 6 out of 10. It's definitely better than average, and actually was a little bit better than I was expecting after hearing such negativity going into actually playing it. But overall, I definitely had some fun, and it may not be as classic as the original Mega Man's by any means, but it definitely is still a well-playing game. But anyway guys, that will wrap up this review, and I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.